Hi guys, so in this video what we're going to do is, now that we've done quadratic equations by factoring, we're going to go ahead and get into quadratic equations by taking the square root. So solving by taking the square root. I am going to go over both complex solutions, like ones with complex solutions and ones with real solutions, just so that I can, so that I don't have to make two separate videos for both of those. So if you don't know what complex solutions are, please go back to my YouTube channel and look for a video where I go over how to, how to take square roots of complex numbers, or going over complex numbers. So yeah. So we have 10 problems here, and the reason why I made up 10 problems was because I want to make sure that, because some of these have real solutions, others have complex solutions, so I really wanted to make sure and go over as many as I can, so that, so that I can, so that you guys can see how I do it. So the first one we're going to go over is pretty simple. X squared minus 4 equals 0. Now, this is by solving square roots, solving by taking square roots. So we're not going to factor this. The way that you're going to do this one is you're going to add 4 to both sides, and you have x squared equals 4, and then take the square root of both sides, and it gives you x equals, and you're going to take the plus or minus square root. So plus or minus 2, right? That's because when you plug in -2 quantity squared minus 4 equals 0, you get 4 minus 4 equals 0. So you can say that -2 is also a solution. So x equals 2 and -2, right? Or you can say x equals, with the brace like this, right? So this would be your answer, right? So that one's pretty easy. The next one we're going to go over is 2x squared minus 18 equals 0. Now there are two ways to do this one. You can either divide both sides by 2 and say x squared minus 9 equals 0, and then add 9 to both sides and say x squared equals 9, right? And then take the square root and say x equals, and again, the positive or negative square root, so plus or minus 3. So x equals 3 or -3. There's another way you can do this one. 2x squared minus 18 equals 0. You can add 18 to both sides, and then you have 2x squared minus, or I'm sorry, 2x squared equals 18, and then divide both sides by 2. You get x squared equals 9, and then take the square root of both sides, and you get x equals, again, plus or minus 3, and so your answers are x equals -3 and x equals 3, right? So these are two different ways in which you can do it. Okay, so on to the next one. 2x squared plus 3 equals 5. So for some of them, you can't take the greatest common factor like I did for the other one. This one, you're actually going to have to do it using the second method that I did. So -3 on both sides, and then 2x squared equals 2, and then you're going to divide by 2 on both sides, get x squared equals 1, right? And then take the square root, and you're going to say x equals plus or minus 1. And sometimes in your exams, it's going to have like something like this, right? Or I think it would be like something like that. I can't remember exactly how it looks, but it would be something like that, and where they would use it in set builder, or put it in set builder notation or set notation. So then the next one says 7x squared minus 1 equals 0. So this one is a little bit tricky. So it looks simple, but there's a tiny, a little extra step that you have to take. So you add 1 to both sides, and you get 7x squared equals 1, and then you're going to divide it by 7, right? So this cancels out. You get x squared equals 1 over 7. And then you're going to take the square root, and you get x equals, and you're going to say plus or minus the square root of 1 over the square root of 7. This is equal to plus or minus 1 over square root of 7. However, that extra step that I was talking about, you have to go ahead and do, so x equals, and you're going to do 1 over the square root of 7, and it's plus or minus, right? So then you're going to rationalize the denominator. And if you don't know how to do that, I do have a video in my YouTube channel about that. How to rationalize denominators, or, you know, doing, like, simplifying square roots by rationalizing denominators. So this becomes the square root of 7 over 7. So x is equal to plus or minus square root of 7 over 7. And again, they would, if it's multiple choice, they would say x equals negative square root of 7 over 7, comma, square root of 7 over 7. So as long as you see the right answer, you're good. They just might write it in a different form, but it'll still be the same answer. So number 5 is also a little tricky. Number 5 says 2x quantity squared, and then there is minus 9 equals 0, right? So this one, you have to pay attention to this parentheses here. 2x quantity squared, it's actually going to be 4x squared, right? Minus 9 equals 0. And then you're going to add 9 to both sides. So then this cancels out. You get 4x squared equals 9. And then you divide both sides by 4. And you get x squared equals 9 over 4. And then take the square root. And you have x equals plus or minus. And it's going to be the square root of 9 over the square root of 4. So x would be plus or minus 3 over 2. So x equals negative 3 over 2, comma 3 over 2. Those would be your answers, right? So you just have to understand how to rationalize denominators, how to take the square root of a fraction. And there are some where it's a little bit trickier, and we're going to do one like that in the next example, where it's imaginary numbers, right? So number 6, x squared plus 2 equals 0. You're going to subtract 2 on both sides, right? And you have x squared equals negative 2. And then you're going to take the square root, and you have x equals plus or minus, and you have the square root of negative 2. Now, when you have the square root of negative 2, you have to say, you have to remember that I equals the square root of negative 1, right? So if you think about it, this is x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 2. right? So let me go ahead and just color code it. So remember that when you multiply two numbers inside a square root, you can take the square root of both of those numbers. So really what this is plus or minus the square root of -1 times the square root of 2. The square root of -1 is I, so we can say, and because it's plus or minus, it has to be plus or minus when you're doing equations. You can say x equals plus or minus I square root of 2. And so your answers are x equals -I square root of 2 and x equals I square root 2, right? So yeah, as long as you understand that, like, you have to be good at how to simplify square roots to be able to do these. So yeah. So number 7 says 9x squared plus 1 equals 0. So we're going to subtract 1 on both sides. We get 9x squared minus, or I'm sorry, 9x squared equals -1. And then divide both sides by 9. And we get x squared equals -1 over 9. And then take the square root. And we get x equals the square root of -1 over the square root of 9. And again, it's plus or minus. So this would be x equals plus or minus I over 9. Or I'm sorry, over 3, excuse me. So really, you can say x equals 1/3 I, comma, -1/3 I. Or you can also say x equals I over 3, comma, -I over 3. Most likely, they're going to have it this way. So yeah, as long as you understand, like, the difference between those two, then yeah, you're good. So the next one says 3x squared plus 5 equals 0. So we're going to go ahead and, so we're going to subtract 5 on both sides. We get 3x squared equals -5. And then divide both sides by 3. So divide both sides by 3. And we get x squared equals -5/3. And then lastly, we're going to take the square root. So square root of both sides. We get x equals plus or minus the square root of -5 over the square root of 3. Now again, the square root of -5 is equal to the square root of -1 times the square root of 5. And since it's plus or minus, we would put plus or minus. So this would be I square root of 5. So really, this would be plus or minus I square root of 5 over the square root of 3. Now, the last part that you're going to do is you're going to rationalize it. So you have to rationalize the denominator. So you're going to multiply it by the bottom by the square root of the bottom, and you have plus or minus I square root of 15 over 3, right? And again, there's different ways in which they'll write it. So they'll say it's going to be like plus or minus, so it'll be like square root of 15 I over 3, comma, negative square root of 15 I over 3. And then they'll say like I square root 15 over 3, comma, negative I square root of 15 over 3. Or they can also say 1/3, or actually, they can also say this. Square root of 15 over 3 I, comma, negative square root of 15 over 3 I. these are all different ways in which you can write it. I'm just showing you guys the different ways so that y'all are not confused if it's written in a certain way, but those are all acceptable ways to write it. So yeah, right? So then we have 4x squared. So this one we have 4x squared plus 7 equals 0, right? So we have minus 7 on both sides. So we're going to subtract 7 on both sides. And so this cancels out. We get 4x squared equals negative 7. And then divide both sides by 4. And we get x squared equals negative 7 over 4. And then take the square roots of both sides. And we have x squared equals, we're going to say the square root of negative 1 times square root of 7 over square root of 4. And it's plus or minus, right? Sorry, and it should be x, not x squared. So then we have x equals plus or minus I square root of 7 over 2. And again, they'll write it in certain ways. So they can say x equals plus or minus square root of 7 over 2i. Yeah, I mean, most likely they'll have it like this, and the separate answers are square root of 7 over 2i, comma, negative square root of 7 over 2i. Thing is, there's a certain number of ways to write it, as long as you understand those different ways, like I said, then you're good, right? So this is the last one of this video, guys. So this one looks a little bit more tricky. We're going to go ahead and subtract 1 on both sides here, right? So then we have 1/2 x squared, and then this cancels out, so we have 1/2 x squared equals negative 1, and then you're going to take, so you're going to multiply by 2, okay? So multiply by 2 on both sides, and so this cancels out. You have x squared equals negative 2, and then lastly, you're going to take the square root of both sides, right? So x equals plus or minus, and again, it's the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 2, so it'll be x equals plus or minus I square root of 2, and so x equals I square root 2, comma, negative I square root 2. Okay, guys, so that is how you solve quadratics by taking square roots. So yeah, I know this was a little bit lengthy, but if you guys have any questions whatsoever, please do let me know. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching, and please like, comment, and or subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.